Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado again on the same thing. Ripple, ripple, ripple. So anyway, this is one of those interesting cases. I said as facts materialize, I'll keep you guys informed. So we heard about it from a tweet yesterday, and then Fortune and CoinDesk and Wall Street Journal covered it. And then today there was the counterfiling summary that Ripple provided. And based upon that, as I mentioned, there was about an 80% chance the SEC would pursue something. So given that Christmas is here and all this other stuff, I thought for sure that nothing would come about that till at least a week or two. A few hours after I made that video, the SEC announced the enforcement action against Ripple, and they dropped a 71-page document that they filed Southern District of Manhattan. So it did take a little bit of time for me to kind of read through it and take a look at key facts and materials. And it's definitely a very interesting, very unique case. It's not just against Ripple, but it's against two of the principals of Ripple, Chris Larsen and Brad Garlinghouse, the former CEO and founder and the current CEO. And when I read through the entire document, it blew my mind that it's not a 10b-5 case, which would be securities fraud from what the SEC is claiming. So they request jury trial, and it's very clear that this is a heavy-handed enforcement action. This is not something that I think they're going to want somebody to pay a fine. The crux of the matter comes down to Brad and Chris, according to the SEC document, about $1.3 billion worth of XRP was divested over an 8-year period, about half of which to retail and about half to institutional, if the numbers are right. And Brad and Chris apparently got somewhere in the magnitude of $600 million personally. Now, whether you think XRP is a security or not, the fact that the principals of the company personally paid themselves $600 million, and that it seems like the company sourced its substantive operations funds from the sale of XRP is the matter that is causing the sticking point and what justifiably does piss off the SEC, especially given that the Ripple company is equity financed. And so it would be one thing if you had a large self-sustaining ecosystem where there's a lot of network value in that ecosystem, and you don't need a custodial entity for it to function, and you're equity financing a company to contribute, appreciate value there. It's another thing entirely for one entity to run the whole show, and then for that entity, when it has the option to use institutional investors, sell equity to finance the growth of their ecosystem, as they did as they were getting VC capital for their company, instead to choose to finance operations through the divestment to retail investors of an instrument. So this is definitely a big one. And it's a lot larger than I expected. The problem is that the enforcement mechanism is very heavy-handed and ham-fisted. In my prior statements, I said that, I don't think XRP is a security. And I think in its current form, its current use, and the level of decentralization the ecosystem has, that's certainly true. Now, was Ripple a security at some point during its life? I'm sure a fair argument could be made that in 2012, 2013, 2014, those early years, that there were security-like characteristics to Ripple that probably could have made it a security. But that's probably was true of Ethereum, and it was certainly true of Bitcoin in the early days. And they have this concept of sufficiently decentralized that they've been kind of pushing around as a new standard. The crux of the matter is that there's allegations of, or at least a specter of market manipulation, a specter of a horse and pony show, information asymmetries, and evidence that the principals enriched themselves with $600 million from divestment. And these are the facts of the case that are brought out, and they're not flattering. in any certain matter. So who the hell knows where this is all going to turn out? And the problem is that to get recourse and actually pursue an enforcement action under this model, it creates problems for the industry as a whole. It broadens the Howey test in ways that are not just inconvenient, they're dangerous to innovation in the United States. On the other hand, I can understand why the SEC would bring the suit. They'd say, if you guys believe so much in your ecosystem and you had access to Andreessen Horowitz and all this money in Silicon Valley, why didn't you just hold on to your XRP and continue growing your parent company through VC investment? And then once the ecosystem is sufficiently decentralized and broad and powerful, then go ahead and divest. Why did you pay yourself first, regardless of whether the ecosystem is great or not? And when you had the opportunity to use regulated smart money as opposed to retail money. So it's definitely not clean. And this is definitely it's going to be a shit show for the entire industry. And as with all of these cases, when you have flirting with a 10b5 situation, you're probably going to have a lot more to say from former employees, current employees, affiliates and associates. For example, there was already some things in the core filing about them offering large sums of money to get listed on certain exchanges and so forth, and emails that came up and these types of things. And that paper trail will only get deeper over time, some foreign, some domestic. The other thing is that the SEC is a civil agency. It doesn't put people in jail. It just charges them with securities violations. But it's very common in large enforcement actions for multiple agencies to get involved in those enforcement actions. It would not surprise me, reading what's in the SEC filing, if we saw more agencies get involved at some point in the future and go beyond just civil actions and potentially go to criminal actions. Market manipulation and this type of behavior is not really well tolerated in the United States. And once you have a target on your back and the regulators are pursuing it, there tends to be a dogpile effect that occurs if they can get through that. So in the coming weeks, it wouldn't surprise me to see more said about this, but it's certainly larger than I thought it was. It's one thing to say, hey, we're going to have a big tussle about something being a security. It's another thing saying we feel that the conduct of the principals of the company is materially predatory towards groups of people and presenting evidence that they've divested 600 million on the backs of these people. And basically when they could have easily equity financed the company and grown the company. So not clean, not pretty, and it's going to be pretty rough for everybody on that side of the aisle. Now, the open question of whether XRP is a security or not is a very interesting one. I still believe, given the facts of today, that XRP is not a security. And even if it was to be ruled a security, and Chris and Brad suffer consequences for that, from engorgement to other things, who would run the ecosystem? The system would still likely run. There would still likely be adherence. There would still likely be network traffic and consensus nodes and these types of things. So on the outset, it doesn't look like it makes much sense to apply that standard. The problem is that standard has to be applied to do what they want to do, which is to hold the principals of the company personally liable for what they feel is misconduct counter to the goodwill of retail investors. So it's not a pleasant situation in that respect. Anyway, highly recommend you guys take a look at the 71-page document that the SEC pushed out. It has some surprising information inside of it, and again, it's kind of surprising they released it right before Christmas. It's clearly something that they want to ensure is floating around their agency and floating around the news cycles prior to the regime change. But I don't think this one's going to get dismissed. I think this one's going to be in the courts definitely for a while. I'm surprised they didn't go with a 10b5 given what they presented. Kind of took it right up to the edge and then backed off. Use your best judgment about where this goes. Now, what does this mean for the industry as a whole? As I said, broadening the Howey test is always counterproductive, or in many cases counterproductive. And it just shows you good governance matters, checks and balances matter, good custodial standards matters, transparency matters. Informational asymmetries are always problematic, and the point of disclosures and the point of oversight is to ensure that they don't exist. At least they don't exist in ways that are counterproductive to the most vulnerable in markets. So there's going to definitely be in 2021 a reckoning on the regulatory side and in the response to the regulatory side about how do we improve these governance problems that exist. I don't think at the moment this suit will have any impact on any of the third generation cryptocurrencies. There is a broader question about proof of stake in general, and there's a big diversity of opinions about what does that mean. And Ethereum too is going to force that conversation because of its scale in the industry. If we were all at the Cardano size, I think we could last another 2 or 3 years without any regulatory scrutiny or oversight, and they would just kind of have a wait and see attitude. But because Ethereum is so large and it has such an outsized influence, and it is treated already differently, it's treated as a commodity, I think their existence is going to provoke a broader conversation about proof of stake in general. That is going to have a profound impact on the third generation cryptocurrencies and how they're regulated moving forward. Now, Ripple probably won't, but of course, any broadening of the Howey test would. However, if Ripple is to prevail and it's not a security, then it has the opposite effect in that it would greatly diminish the SEC's capability to pursue things on the proof of stake side or cryptocurrencies in general. So it seems like they want to bet the farm on this one because there are facts and circumstances about the case that go beyond the academic application of Howey, and they go into the conduct of the principals of the company and how the principals of the company enrich themselves through the divestment of hundreds of millions of dollars of XRP, and according to the SEC, exerted a great degree of influence and control over the price and attempted to manipulate the price in the market, which is why I'm surprised it didn't become a 10b5 case. That said, this is the beginning of a process. And again, more regulatory agencies can come on and pursue up to criminal charges in addition to civil charges. And there's going to be a long fight from here on out. Ripple's an extremely well-capitalized company, and they're represented by very competent counsel. So they're definitely not going to go down without a fight. And because the principals and founders of the organization have been dragged into this, and that corporate veil is no longer apparent, there really isn't a strong incentive to settle. So much more will come. As I said, former employees, current employees, others will definitely talk, and more evidence will be brought to bear. And this is certainly a case that's going to be litigated for quite some time, probably well over a year to 2 years. It won't have an immediate impact on us, the industry, but it does have a definitional and clarity-wise impact on securities laws as they are applied to cryptocurrencies in general. And we'll kind of see where things go and what happens. Surprising document, though. Very surprising. Didn't expect quite that. And it was a long read. As I mentioned, 71 pages long. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of meat and potatoes. And these are not easy documents to read because they contain a lot of technical language in terms of art. And there's always, of course, a story. Now, you have to be careful when you read it. It's kind of like a divorce, and you're reading the soon-to-be ex-wife's version of events of the marriage. As well-intended as it could be, it's probably not the fairest representation of facts and matters. And the point of a judicial system is to give people a chance to defend themselves. So there will be a rebuttal, and there will, of course, be things that were not mentioned, which will certainly change the story and so forth. But in general, the SEC tends to have principles. So these principles are that if you divest hundreds of millions of dollars when you don't have to, on the backs of retail investors, we're not going to like you very much. That's a basic one, especially when you haven't reached a certain level of success. And they usually define that success as a self-sustaining ecosystem where you're no longer necessary to be around. Like, it's okay for Bill Gates to sell his Microsoft stock. He's not really necessary for that company, and he achieved a certain level of success there. Had he done it right after the IPO, that'd be a different matter. And securities laws reflects that. And there are whole kinds of processes for insiders to divest and to be able to reach those milestones. And some people take it up to the wire. Most people comply with that. Ripple had the opportunity to equity finance their growth as a company and use venture capital investment to develop out the ecosystem without divesting XRP. Organizations like the Ethereum Foundation do not, because there's no equity to sell and there's no venture capitalist there. So there is an expectation of some notion of divestment. And you can say what you will about that. It's a different financing model. Here's where they kind of double dipped and they had the best of both worlds and chose to utilize the more convenient of the two for liquidity and operational expenses. And that's an unlitigated but interesting area of law in the space as a whole. So that's all I'm going to say about it. There's nothing more to know. There's probably no more videos coming. As I said, I didn't expect to see this so soon. Had I known it was coming today, I would have read it first before making the video I made earlier. Again, I don't think XRP Security, with facts and circumstances as it is today, but the conduct of the insiders and how they've managed their treasury and what they've done with the ecosystem, that's a different matter entirely. And that doesn't, to get recourse there, it doesn't necessarily require Ripple to be a security. There are still many things that you can do in that respect. As I mentioned, it does not seem to impact the broader industry at the moment. And a lot of people are going to opine on this, especially since Christmas vacation's here and they have nothing better to do in the coming weeks. And we'll learn a lot more. And it would not surprise me to see more than one regulatory agency piggyback on this action, either state or federal. Could be the Southern District of Manhattan. It could be IRS or DOJ. We'll see. But that'll happen probably after Christmas. There's no huge urgency there. So anyway, that's all I know here. And your guess is as good as mine about where this one's going to pan out, where it's going to go. But it's going to get very messy. Some very nasty things are going to be said and done. And probably a lot of friendships are going to be broken and a lot of lawyers speak. And one thing's clear. The real winner here are the law firms. They're going to be making 7 to 8 figures in legal fees before this is all said and done. Till next time, cheers, everyone, and have a Merry Christmas.